Welcome everybody, my name is Aske Robenhagen and thank you for listening to this video presentation of some of the research we are doing at the Network Institute. Before I begin, I'd like to just thank Anna and Victor for inviting me to come and present this work here, which unfortunately I'm not able to be in person because I'm attending an event in Denmark today and one in Sweden tomorrow. But I hope you all have a great day. The Ict4d application I'm presenting here today is the result of a research project at the Network Institute, combining research from two different areas, with me, supervised by Victor, from computer sciences and artificial intelligence, and Julie and Maria from organizational sciences, providing a social science perspective on the project. Before I describe the application we have built, I want to give you an overview of the local context as well as the partner organizations we work with out there, to sort of give the background for why the app is built the way it is and some of the principles that might be useful for other people working in Ict4d on similar applications. On the 25th of April 2015, Nepal was struck by a 7.8 megawatt earthquake in the central regions, along with several aftershocks. The shocks left nearly 9,000 people dead, 22,000 people injured, and 3.5 million people homeless. This is in a country of 29 million people, where roughly 25% live below the poverty line and the infrastructure is already in serious need of development. The international aid response was one of the biggest ever, but coping effectively with a disaster of this magnitude takes an enormous amount of oversight, knowledge, and cooperation between many different stakeholders, from the most local to the highest levels of government and management of relief institutions. To help with this effort, many local organizations organize volunteers. Two of these organizations, Accountability Lab Nepal and Local Interventions Groups, the very next day used their extensive networks to organize volunteers to help with connecting people via radio after the telephone networks went down, and visiting remote villages to gather their needs and bring this information to relief organizations who otherwise might not have known and been able to respond effectively to their calamity. 2 years after the earthquake, despite hard work by all these different organizations, a lot of problems still remain. Thousands of people still live in temporary shelter which is not fit for neither the rains of the monsoons or the cold winters. And despite money having been earmarked by the government and set aside for it, big sums of that has not been paid out, both because the procedure for obtaining it can be difficult, people don't have ID cards, or for those who have obtained it, it hasn't been enough to rebuild their houses because the stipulations for getting the grant require that you use cement and steel, which has to be transported into a lot of these places up in the mountains, which makes building a house a lot more expensive than what the grant allows for, which means that these people are sort of stuck in limbo where they can't get the second level of the grant because they haven't started building, and they don't have enough money to start building the first round. The effects of the earthquake has also led to a lot of Nepalis seeking employment in the Gulf states and other Asian countries, and for people in the rural communities that often means organizing this through a manpower agency. The problem is that a lot of these manpower agencies are run by unscrupulous people who will charge a high sum to organize a job that then eventually turns out to be a lot worse paid and with a lot worse condition than originally stipulated, meaning that some of these people end up in debt or sort of in virtual slavery in these Middle Eastern countries. These effects of the earthquake have led Accountability Lab, the organization we work most closely with in Nepal, to change their focus from purely relief to one that focuses on the ongoing and long-term reconstruction efforts, as well as the related issue of migratory workers and the issues that arise from that, both in the villages but also for people who are abroad. The way the citizen help desk work is that there's a central office who sort of coordinates all the activities, and then there's a big team of community frontline associates or CFAs who work in the field, in the communities where they build up sort of long-term relationships and become the sort of go-to person for information. So if someone has like a particular issue or things come up again, like either individually or in big community meetings that they organize, so for example the reconstruction efforts or things that are a bit more sensitive, for example like admitting that you were defrauded by a manpower agency, which can often take a long time to discover. These people are able to do that and gather this data that can then be used to either go directly to someone who's in power and able to make some changes, like at the government level, or approaching relief organizations or someone else who might have an expertise in this particular area, which means that these people who are out in the rural communities and maybe have a lack of access to the right kind of information about who to contact, there is like an effective go-between who can organize this and sort of help resolve some of these issues. That's sort of the main working method, as well as like sort of like intermittent surveys on behalf of other organizations. To investigate what we could offer to this project, sort of a living labs term, we start out by going there and then closely analyzing using network analysis the knowledge that flows through this knowledge network, and see how we could improve this network and their processes to help them achieve more impact from the very situated local knowledge out in the villages, and transforming that into something that could be made actionable by the big relief organizations and local government stakeholders. So we started out by mapping all this and then sort of creating like a chart of challenges, and then later on I'll present our proposed solution to these challenges. Based on this analysis, we identified some key challenges for Accountability Lab and Citizen Help Desk as an organization, as well as some desirable traits that any like technological solution should have based on previous experience on other Ict4d projects, as well as consideration of the local context. The main sort of big challenge they face is that there's a lot of change constantly, both sort of like environmentally, like certain areas we are hearing a lot of reports that like sort of changing weather patterns means that farming has changed, but also like roads changing because of rain and stuff like that, and the fact that there's not a lot of connectivity for a lot of these means that the CFAs work in an area where a lot of the time they don't have any internet connectivity, or they don't have access to power to charge their phones, which of course means that any sort of like solution that uses a lot of either data or power is going to be difficult to implement and use out in the field. Another issue is that the political situation is changing. There's just been a local election for the first time since 1997 here on Sunday, which is going to take place over 2 rounds, second one in June. But it means that since then, no new officials have been elected to these posts that sort of have been taken over by bureaucrats or the parties themselves, which means that it's been very unclear who's entirely responsible for some of the funding and for taking responsibility for some of these projects. Accountability Lab and Citizen Help Desk have to organize and work within this area. So a lot of the sort of the local knowledge they have about who to contact to get things done is some very important knowledge, but something that is probably about to change now after the election. Another thing is that as an NGO, the donor situation changes a lot. So depending on the focus and how involved the donors want to be, that also has an impact on the focus of their project. For example, whilst we were there, they got a new donor, which explains part of the focus and move to migration of labor, because that was the American charity backing them, one of their big issues. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration as well, that a lot of the data they collect might potentially see a different use in the future as well. So sort of a flexible data model might be useful for storing this, so it can be used in the future, whereas for right now it's not being stored at all after it's collected and sort of made into a monthly report. It just sort of gets deleted and lost. Based on the analysis of other Ict4d projects, we also came up with some sort of desirable qualities of any potential solutions. And the first one is the principle of reuse, reduce, and recycle. So to help facilitate uptake and make people use this technology, we want people to reuse existing technologies, reduce the amount of new technologies that need to be implemented, because that makes the learning curve bigger and makes it harder to maintain. And also, if it's possible, to recycle existing data and tools and incorporate them in some way. I think that will make it easier to get people to use this new tool. Another thing to consider in this context is the idea of robust development. So including redundancies to make sure that even if one part of the system fails because of like power or there's no data for a couple of days, other aspects of the application can still work. For example, by like storing the information locally and only submitting when there's Wi-Fi. Building it in a way so each individual part is sort of modular, so if one component fails, the other one can still work. Because sometimes like there's no one around to maintain it, or there's, as I said, there can be like a major outage, like in a disaster situation, for example. And the final principle is sort of like if it's possible to enhance local knowledge sharing, then that's often a desirable aspect, and sometimes a lot of this information comes for free. So even if the focus is on migration and reconstruction, often when you have a community meeting, a lot of other issues will come up, so things like water and stuff like that might be of interest to a potential donor or another relief organization that works in this area. So based on this analysis, the challenges and sort of the positive desiderata, we developed the Citizen Help Desk app, which I'm going to present now. It consists basically of 4 different aspects: an announcement where people in the office can make announcements to all the CFAs, a chat app which uses very little data that allows CFAs to sort of communicate in real time both with the office and amongst each other. It consists of a wiki where they can sort of add notes on things that worked as a learning organization. So when they conducted a community meeting or they managed to resolve a kind of issue, they can write up about that and sort of like share this knowledge amongst each other, because they often don't see each other very often. As well as sort of like the core, which is like the daily community report and surveys. I'll go over each part in turn in a minute, but first of all, the whole app only takes up about 600 kilobytes. It doesn't require any sort of proprietary tools or anything like that. Everything's open source and free, which makes it very easy for an organization in another context to get up and running very quickly, as well as to localize it to fit a particular need or a particular language. All the components of the app sort of work individually, and the first one I'm going to go over is the announcement part, which was based on a sort of a use case and a need for people in the office to send out general information, or whenever there's a new change in sort of like the regulations or some kind of major announcement that needs to be stored and accessible permanently to the CFAs in the field. So we built this using sort of their WordPress website, which they already have and which you can get for free, which allowed them to use a custom post type very easily to write a post that then gets stored locally on the CFA's smartphone. The second part is the chat component, which allow field workers and the office to communicate in real time with one another in a sort of pretty data efficient way. And that was again based on a need that it was difficult to keep in contact with one another because all the CFAs had like different tools they were using and there's different ways of working kind of thing. So now by giving everyone a very cheap smartphone, they can keep in contact and store this knowledge, which might be something interesting in these chats once in a while. The third component is sort of a shared wiki where the frontline workers and the office workers can collaboratively create guides on how to perform sort of the different activities of the job, like organizing a community meeting, or if they find a solution to a particular issue that comes up, how they approach and how they solve that kind of thing. So this kind of knowledge can be shared with the other CFAs. They're trying to sort of increase the amount of time they meet, but very often they don't meet all together except once every second month. So this is a way to help them collaborate and learn from each other as they work. The final component is the main data gathering tool of the application. It's structured around a daily report on a day-to-day basis. CFAs will fill this in about people they've talked to and stuff in sort of general trends. Then there's the community report, which is when they have a community meeting for a large gathering of people. And finally, there's a survey, which is like more topic-based and done in an ad hoc fashion, for example, for another organization or when there's a particular topic of interest. All of the reports can be changed and very easily structured using the back end of the Kobo Toolbox, which is an open source tool and backed by a lot of big donors, which means that for humanitarian organizations it's free and allows unlimited data storage of images, videos, and audio, which the CFAs produce a lot of from the community meetings, for example, and sort of interviews they conduct. We went with this option because there seems to be a trend as well from a lot of people we interviewed in Kathmandu and in other organizations that there's a certain sort of respectability around this tool because of its backers and because it's so easy to use as well. So we want to incorporate this, and it was something that they had already used previously, which meant that there wasn't much of a learning curve to using this tool instead of something custom built. So it followed in line with sort of the desiderata we had as well for an desirable implementation. Furthermore, it allowed easy offline use, so whenever the CFAs don't have internet access, they can store the reports locally and submit them whenever they have access. Once the reports are submitted, you have a very easy way of getting an overview using the Kobo backend that allows you to sort of visualize all the data you've gathered on a map. You can get summary statistics and other things that help people in the office get an overview of what's going on which was something that they previously struggled to because they would get messages from some people on WhatsApp, something would come through Facebook, someone through email. This way they have it all in one place and have a very easy way of exporting it for analysis in other programs if they want, sort of in CSV or anything like that. So it helps them get the overview they need to create their reports and to get the overview needed to make sort of decisions about directions and people to contact. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the future of this app and where it's at the moment. We have conducted tests with a lot of the CFAs and sort of built it with them in a iterative process in Nepal. And next week we are rolling it out, so everyone will have to start using this tool for all the data gathering and communication between each other. We were a little bit sort of delayed by the election sort of last week, which meant that we weren't allowed to do some of the activities, but now we are organizing this. And the next step as well is in the coming months, another organization we've been in contact with are doing a project where they're going to track relief funding from the moment it's signed into law or sort of a requisition is made, and we want to track that money all the way down to the final end project. And they're using another tool to gather this data, but we want to build sort of a backend that can take this data from Kobo, structure it into linked data, so we can integrate these different data sets and create sort of complex queries across these different data sets that will allow us to do a lot more complex analysis and sort of identify things that would not be possible with all these different data sets a lot of these different organizations have, which was a point that many organizations also mentioned out there. There's a lot of sort of separate activities going on all around, very little coordination between them. This sort of data gathering and sharing should allow it to be possible to do more coordinated efforts and ultimately make the funding much more effective in the way it's used on the ground in local projects. The final thing we want to do as well is we have been in contact with Accountability Labs, sort of the overall organization, and they're interested in trying to expand this project potentially to Liberia and Pakistan, two other countries they're working in. But that's dependent on an impact assessment we're going to conduct in the coming months as well. Okay, I think that's everything for me. Thank you very much for taking the time to listening to this video presentation, and I hope to have conversations with several of you in the future about your projects. Thank you.